All right, picking up where we left off with the ratification of the Constitution, that brings us to our first presidential election, in which George Washington becomes the only person in our nation's history to win unanimously in the Electoral College. Now, Washington truly did become a symbol of the new government and our nation. And as he kind of moves through his first term, he's going to fight congressional effort to limit executive power, especially when it comes to foreign affairs. Now you got to remember, everything he's doing kind of sets precedent for future presidents. So he knew every single decision he made, could have a lasting legacy. When we look at Washington's cabinet, we see Henry Knox become Secretary of War, Thomas Jefferson Secretary of State, whose role is really to kind of oversee U.S. officials overseas, and kind of bring in foreign diplomats and meet with them as well. Kind of keeping up communications with foreign governments. And not only does he do this, but he's also in charge of taking the census of the United States, which is really important when it comes to figuring out the population of states to help with determining representation in Congress. And he was able to, do all of his work with really only 5 staff members. You think about how much our government has grown today and the bureaucracy that we have. But then we also have Alexander Hamilton, who serves as Washington's Secretary of Treasury. Now, what we see eventually happen is that Jefferson and Hamilton will really not see eye to eye on very many issues. But George Washington all along kind of discourages partisan politics, something that begins to develop in his term. And so, like I said, many of the issues that arise during Washington's presidency, Jefferson and Hamilton will take conflicting views on. For example, when it comes to the Constitution, Jefferson was very much in favor of a strict interpretation of the Constitution. The belief that if the Constitution doesn't give the federal government power to do it, then it can't do it. And with that idea, Jefferson was more of a states' rights, kind of a politician, wanting to make sure that the states stay sovereign and kind of, checking the power of the federal government. However, obviously Hamilton was more of a loose interpretation of the Constitution then, because he favored a stronger central government. And he kind of uses the elastic clause where Congress and government can do whatever is necessary and proper to ensure peace and prosperity. And so this kind of sets the groundwork for eventual kind of 2 different political views and political parties. These 2 men will also take different views when it comes to the economy. If you look at Jefferson and his view, he kind of looked at continuing doing what America does best. And we have a strong agricultural system. And he thought that we had so much land, let's use that to our benefit, harvest these cash crops, and use the surplus to trade for other things that we might need. Well, on the flip side of that coin then, you've got Hamilton, who wanted to industrialize. He wanted to kind of diversify our economy a little bit more, keep a strong agricultural base, but look to promote and create our own industrial base so that we can actually start to make some of our own products and we're not so reliant upon other countries. And in that aspect, Hamilton would kind of want to follow in the footsteps of the British and kind of side with them and some of the views that they had, whereas Hamilton was more in touch with kind of a French system and kind of having a stronger alliance with them. Another issue these 2 men will debate deals with the national bank. This time, Jefferson takes the stance as being anti-bank. He doesn't think that the federal government has the power to legislate the creation of a national bank. Part of the reason is nowhere in the Constitution does it say that they can, and he takes that strict interpretation of the Constitution. On the flip side of the coin, however, Hamilton is pro-bank. He thinks that it would help kind of regulate the economy, create a common currency, create some stability, lending power, and it's something that the government should do to try to help promote the industry and a sound economy. And even when it comes to people, these two men will kind of take opposing viewpoints. Once again, you've got Jefferson, who has extreme faith in people to make good decisions and lead the government and be active citizens. Um, Whereas Hamilton kind of feared people making the decisions and running government, and he wanted to kind of leave that governing to the kind of like the more educated, maybe the higher class, to kind of make the decisions that would help the country the most. And so he kind of favored the rich, and then thought that everybody else would benefit from that. Whereas Jefferson, was kind of more for the people and feared too strong or too big of a government, thinking that government might actually, eventually destroy liberties if it became too strong. And therefore, you see the birth of really two political philosophies. Jefferson, with the idea of kind of the Republican view of what gets developed, being more of a states' rights activist, wanting an agricultural based economy, strict interpretation of the Constitution, and even siding with the French. Whereas Hamilton was more pro British in their form of government, which had a strong central government. They had a bank, they had industrialized, and so you can really see these two viewpoints play out into the creation of these two new political parties. However, because of Washington's symbol and status in the nation, the formation of these political parties won't happen for a few more years, because most people still kind of went with what he saw was best. And being that he disliked, the squabbling of political parties and discouraged partisan politics, we don't really see a true formation of these parties for some time still. Now, whereas the Articles of Confederation didn't have a judicial branch, obviously the Constitution does. And the Judiciary Act of 1789 establishes our Supreme Court and our court systems. And what we see eventually is that the Supreme Court would have one Chief Justice, which the first Chief Justice is John Jay, and also 5 Associate Justices. There was also creation of 13 districts. But the thing about the Supreme Court and the judges back then was it was a very difficult job, because the Supreme Court justices would have to travel great distances to hear the cases. Rather than the cases coming to them, they actually had to travel out on circuit and kind of make the rounds, listening to these cases that had worked their way up to the Supreme Court. So it's not quite how it is today. But if you recall, we were deeply in debt after the Revolutionary War and on the verge of bankruptcy. And so, to try to raise revenue, what the new government does is it turns to tariffs or taxes on imports. And so, the tariff of 1789 establishes a 5% tax on imports or goods coming into the country. Now, what ends up happening is that Southerners, and especially the planters, who relied on these European imports, were upset that they had to pay a higher price on these goods that were coming in. And they also thought that with higher tariffs here, it hurt the sale of their cotton in the European markets. And so they didn't really like these tariffs, and they think it kind of favors the North and the industry that will develop up the northern states. They also thought that might favor the northern shippers, as they're the ones who kind of transport a lot of goods abroad. And so we'll actually see that tariffs will become a very divisive issue, not just now, but even all the way up well through the Civil War of the 1860s. But with that said, we'll take a further look at Washington's administration in our next lesson.